gardener's world. Well, today is the autumn equinox, and summer has slipped away. But in its place, we've got the very best of autumn, because you have this lovely, bright, fresh light. And it's above all the time of fruit. And last night we had quite a storm here at Long. It's still a bit blowy today. And an awful lot of apples were knocked to the ground as windfalls. And they are spread on the orchard floor like confetti after a wedding. And that can be very frustrating, because if you take an apple like this is Ribston Pippin. It's a lovely old-fashioned eater, crisp, stores well, a really good apple to grow at home. But once it's hit the ground, it'll be bruised, even if it looks perfect, and it won't store at all. So you either have to eat it or throw it away. However, today I am going to use up my windfalls in a really constructive way. Now, coming up on tonight's programme, we catch up with Adam at home to see how his new garden is taking shape. And we pay a final visit to the veg plot of our passionate chef, Shaish Alam, as he gathers in his harvest to share with family and friends. And we meet a couple who garden for butterflies and moths. A familiar problem at this time of year are bare patches, where heavy traffic has just worn away the grass. Now, the wear and tear is actually the least of the problems, because grass is tough and it will regrow. But compaction is bad news. So what I really need to do before I do anything else at all is dig it up, really release that compaction. And so I think it's time for a pickaxe. Okay, let's break this up. Now what I'm going to do is sort of drastic in a way, but actually will help. I'm going to remove the top layer of that soil and replace it. So I've made a mixture which will give the grass a start. Roots is going to determine the quality of the grass. Now this is a mixture of loam, garden compost and grit. The grit is fabulous for increasing drainage. Garden compost will feed the soil, and then the soil is simply to replace what I've taken out. So having put soil on, I'm going to do what seems counterintuitive, which is to compact it down a bit, because I want to get rid of any sort of air pockets that when you walk on the turf later will form a dip. So you just walk over it with your heels. Right, let's have a look at the turf. This is a grass mix that is predominantly ryegrass. And ryegrass is best for any hard-wearing lawn or path, but it will not make a perfect, immaculate sward. So it's no good if you're one of these people who wants to have a perfect lawn. But by and large, as a general purpose grass, a ryegrass mix is what you should be looking for. Now, you can see it. I've got a slither here. And when you're laying turf, you want the biggest pieces of turf that you can handle. Because the bigger they are, the slower they are to dry out. And it's the drying out that is the worry. So that isn't going to work. And if I turn it the other way around, what's left is a bigger area. And so if I cut a piece to fit that, I think that's fine. Okay, that's a nice big piece that we can firm down. Now, to fit this one in, I'm going to use the hard edge to keep it in place there, so I can line it up properly. And what I'll do is cut down through this turf as well. Now, if I lift this up and take that off, this should fit perfectly. And the key thing is to make sure the junctions are absolutely tight, because when it dries out, of course they pull apart. But we're not going to let it dry out because I've got a watering can, I'm just going to flood it. And you want to repeat this every day until the grass is growing strongly. And don't tread on it, or let alone mow it, until you see it actively growing. And if it's on an area like this where people are very easily going to walk on it, it's worth just protecting it, just to keep the galumphing feet of Nigel and Deli, let alone my own size of limbs, from walking all over it. Give it a chance to grow. Then when I see signs of strong growth, it can lightly be mown to take the heavy traffic once again. This is the start of a whole series of repair work that we're doing to the paths here along with it. And the principles of this apply whether you are just repairing a patch on a path or laying a new lawn. Mind you, some gardens are much bigger than others, and Alan Power, the head gardener at Stourhead, has a huge acreage under his control. And last week, he showed us around Stourhead in spring. Well, now it is summer.
This is one of the most crucial parts of the garden, the lake. It provides reflections, it provides perspective, and it's a beautiful place to be. But actually today I'm on the lake because I'm on my way to the islands to catch up with the gardeners who are doing a really crucial task that we do every summer. We have two islands at Stourhead, all part of the designed landscape, and we have to come out and trim these islands. We use trimmers because a lot of the material is quite woody. We've got thistles and docks and tree seedlings that we need to get rid of. And we need to get rid of it because we've been working hard over the past month or so to mow and tidy up the landscape. And we want the islands to tie in with that picture so that when you look at the garden, it all fits seamlessly together. And of course, back in the 18th century, this work wouldn't have been half as noisy as it would all have been done with scythes. When Henry Hoare built Stourhead, he surrounded the lake with magnificent structures. The Temple of Apollo, the Pantheon, the Temple of Flora, and some more unusual features like the grotto. The grotto in the garden was built right in the middle of the 18th century, and it's the most magical feature, dressed with statues like the sleeping nymph and the river god protecting the river. But like every feature in the garden, they all require a little bit of maintenance. Something we all have to do as gardeners is that little bit of weeding. But I think this is probably one of the most unique places to do weeding. In front of the 18th century grotto, in the middle of the glorious garden. Now, I've got to do a bit of weeding today, and we do that really for aesthetic purposes, so it looks good, but also to stop the weeds destroying the structure. And it will be the same with any kind of to the joints, and they start expanding the joints. They start destroying the structure slowly over the years. But also, I suppose when you're weeding in your own gardens, whether it's a structure or whether it's through a border, have a think about what weeds you're going to chuck on the compost heap. Things like bindweed and ground elder, they can quite often get through the composting process. And if you're not careful, you'll end up spreading them around the garden again. So be selective and maybe put those to one side, incinerate them or put them in the bin. But I do enjoy getting out here and doing a bit of weeding. I've been doing it for years and years, and getting into the unique places is something very special. The garden for me during the summer is at its greenest, and probably at its truest to the 18th century, before all those exotic plants were introduced to the collection. But we do get the odd treasure flowering during the summer. And this plant here, Rhododendron auriculatum, is one of my favourites. Heavily scented, brilliant white flowers right in the middle of the summer. So every time I walk past them, I just have to stop and take a look. Summertime's a great time to get on with a little bit of pruning in your garden. Have a look at your trees and shrubs, have a look at their shape and size, and have a critical look at what you want from your garden. Just like Mark is doing behind to this Persian ironwood, Parotia persica. He's pruning the suckers away from around the base, so freeing the plant up and allowing us to see the stem. And he's also been downlifting on the edges, so the weight of the branches have risen away from the hostas below. And what that enables us to see is the rhododendron behind. So next spring we're going to see this fantastic display of pink flowers right through the Parotia, thanks to the work that Mark's done. A particular feature in the middle of the summer are the hydrangeas. These hydrangeas are amongst my favourite in the collection. And they're not just my favourite, but Lady Alda Hoare, the last owner of the property, they were her favourite too. She used to buy these hydrangeas, have them flower in the library in the house, and once they were finished flowering, she would pass them out to the head gardener and insist that they were planted as close to the house as possible so she could admire them once they were in the ground. And that's why they're planted in this area of the garden. But they take a little bit of looking after, not just at the start and the end of the seasons, but at this time of the year as well. These flower heads, as spectacular as they are, they're very, very heavy for the plant to support. So when the plants do come into flower, sometimes they drop off. So now and again, the garden team, we come along with our secateurs and we just reduce a little bit of the weight. So just by removing one of the heads, a simple snip, and it's back and it's away from touching and having contact with the soil. And once we're done with these heads, we take them home, put them on the kitchen table, put them in a gardener's mess just to brighten the place up a little bit. But the rest of these heads stay on. They flower through the season. They also protect the buds right through the winter until we prune them next spring. But what I really enjoy is watching the hydrangeas fade away through the end of the season. And they add that lovely sense of colour to the next season, which is autumn.
I love the grandeur and the scale of Starhead, and of course it's enormous and a great luxury to visit it, but of course you can find just as big pleasures from tiny spaces, and usually tiny little events in your own garden. For example, at the moment, these Colchicums, this is Colchicum speciosum album, which is just starting to appear in these naked goblets of flower, known as naked ladies, because the flowers appear before there's any sign of foliage, are a real indication that autumn is coming. Now, one of the things that is really important at this time is harvest, which is why we are now going back to West Wales to visit Sheish on his vegetable plot, where he is gathering and harvesting his crops to share with his family and friends.
This time of the year it feels the best because this is the time we see each of the plants go to its full capacity. Today is the harvest day. We're going to be taking abundance of vegetables, and this is maybe the future way I'm going to be doing the beds. You know, I found the way I had the bed set up in the beginning of the year, and it didn't go well. The one in the middle, that gets wet, very hard to maintain. Then I've been told and given advice by a local gentleman, and he advised me to lift the beds up by adding to the soil and take the vegetable off the ground. And what I'm going to be doing every year now, instead of digging, I'm going to carry on adding things to these beds. Adding nutrients, meaning my horse manure, and I've started making my own topsoil. Having raised beds gives an opportunity for the feeder roots to go down deeper. The more stronger the roots are, I dug out trenches in the beds to create drainage. The rain hits the top, then we're digging trenches going sidewards, so taking the water from the top all the way down to the pond. And these delicate plants like radishes and coriander are thriving. Hopefully you come back in 10 years' time, my bed's on this side. My Naga chilies are have done more than I could ever dream and expected of them. I've been tying the Naga plants for support. It bears a lot of fruit, so just a little helping hand until it gets matured enough. I think on each plant it averagely easy to about 200. The more you pick, the more it'll grow. In the beginning I said that the strength of my chilies will show the quality of my growing. The hottest chili in the world, that comes over 1.5 million Scoville heat units. I had them tested early, so I have an idea if I'm doing it right. Is the heat levels there? And my chilies are at over 600,000 Scoville heat units. It shows for me to have the record. Yes, it's possible. Of course it's possible. Am I going towards it? Yes, I am. Well, this is actually where I planted my lau. In English it's called bottle gourds. And yes, I got a lot of foliage, but not much fruits. I think it lacked pollination. I have seen fruits, but they drop off. But the pollination, as I found, they have female and male flowers. Next year, I'll be taking the male flower myself, and I'm pollinating up to 9 of the female flowers. I'll be giving much more love and attention to these. As I say, it's just the beginning. I can't get everything right, but that's the beauty about it. Is, looking forward to getting things right in the future, for next year. Then having my family here, having my friends come, it's just like a hobby. I'm not doing this as like work. I'm doing this as a pleasure of my life. Let's go and harvest and get some veg. Let's go. Come on. This is just the beginning. I want to start creating my own, pantry. Oh my God, look at the size of this one. Look how hot. I have my own blend of pickles and chutneys and, chilies. I know the only way I ever gonna stop is if the land stops giving. The boys who's been helping me have vegetable shashlik, of course, all the vegetable and all ingredients from my garden. I'm going to keep it simple. What I do is a handful of coriander, a good pinch of mint, 1 purple chili. I've got the Naga. I think this piece for 6-7 of us in the shashlik enough. So that goes in. Garlic goes in, small cubes. You don't want to overpower it. Pepper. And then I use my muscles to bash it up. Okay, now I'm going to just put a little drizzle of oil, just tiny bit to help blend everything together and hold. That's enough. Tiny bit. Give it a good mix. Now the final ingredient I'm going to add to it, a bit of yogurt. Yogurt helps to marinate and at the same time, blends all the spices and things together. The sauce is ready. You don't want to waste any. That goes in like that. Perfect. It's going to go back. And then you just give it a quick mix. Now all I got to do is stir it and put it straight on the barbie. Hopefully in 10 minutes the most it'll be ready. This is pleasure. This is beyond beauty for me. It's a payment that I cannot get it any other way. If you do hard work, you do grafting, and then at the end of it, you get the fruits of the labor. It's for me, it's fantastic. For a beautiful year and to beautiful friendship. And you two over there, you little gorgeous. Very good. I will be searching for produce all my life, definitely. I'm not going to stop eating, I'm not going to stop cooking. Now I don't have to search far. I come to my land. It's here.
We may not be able to make cooking look as effortless as Shish does, but he's absolutely right. Just try it. Just try it. grow some veg, harvest them, cook them, share them with family and friends, and you can't go wrong. It's always a delight. Now I'm going to be planting some garlic, and what you need is good, rich ground, so it's had some compost added to it, it's been cultivated, but it's got good drain. Garlic, you need to sort it out, and choose the very best cloves. And this is a variety called Sprint. And typically, you'll buy it in heads like that. And what you need to do is to sort out the big cloves from the small. And don't plant the smaller ones. This does mean that sometimes you reject half of the contents of a head of garlic. But it is worth it, because this will give you a much better crop. The important thing to remember is to put the pointy end up, and the bottom has a flat plate that the root will come from, and bury it. Make sure that that pointy bit is at least an inch under the surface of the soil. You certainly don't want to plant them any closer than 6 inches. Because all that will happen is you will have smaller bulbs that are competing for the moisture and the goodness, and your harvest will suffer as a result. The reason that you plant garlic at this time of year is because for it to form a nice sized bulb with separate cloves, it needs a period of a month below 10 degrees. So this is a job I definitely like to do, get all my garlic in the ground, certainly by the end of October, and ideally the middle of October. Okay, next up are these big boys. I love this. This is elephant garlic. That is an individual clove, and if you compare it to the size of a whole bulb of Sprint, 1 clove of elephant garlic is bigger than a whole bulb. And the virtues of elephant garlic is, even though it's so big, it's very mild. And so if you're not a big garlic eater, this is a good one for you. And you grow it in exactly the same way. So the spacing is a little bit wider. I would go up to as much as a foot, and make sure you do bury them in the ground. Even though they're the size of a shallot or an onion set, you want a good inch of soil above the top. Now, we've recently been looking quite a lot at planting to attract pollinators, and in particular honeybees, and of course I've started keeping my bees here at Longmeadow. But at this time of year, the most notable insects, of course, are butterflies. And at night, of course, what we don't see are the moths coming out too. They're just as important as pollinators in their own way. And we went to Gloucestershire to visit the garden of Matthew and Sally Oates, who have made a haven for butterflies and moths.
We've been together for 40 years. Sally is very much the gardener and I'm very much the naturalist. And there's a bit of give and take, but the real vision for this garden comes from Sally.
It was my mother who started me off. She taught me how to strike lavender cuttings, and I thought this was absolutely marvellous, and I've never looked back since. Planting for wildlife has always been absolutely key.
We believe very strongly that horticulture and nature conservation actually come together very strongly.
When we first moved to this garden about 25 years ago, it was semi-derelict. And the thing about it, there were no flowers. It was my job to just add in lots and lots of colour and lots of nice nectaring flowers for the butterflies. I've put in structure, I've put in these box hedges so that they produce the wind, and it makes a much nicer environment for the butterflies. It's a relaxed form of gardening, it's not to be too tidy. And this year, very exciting. because we've got breeding hedgehogs. Now, the reason we've got them is because I've got undisturbed areas where I haven't been gardening. They also need several ingredients for their nests, which include dry leaves and moss. And I like integrating as much wildlife as I can.
It also functions very strongly at night, and the nightlife here is really rather interesting. All told, I've recorded about 400 species of moth in this garden. Moths are actually incredible little creatures, and so many of our garden birds feed their young on moth caterpillars, and then of course moths' role as pollinators, light flowering plants, is really, really vital. This is one of the common yellow underwing moths, which gardeners know as lawnmower moths because they flee from in front of your lawnmower as you advance. And you can just see this is a ruby tiger, and the caterpillars of the ruby tiger, and indeed other tiger moths, are the cuckoo food. One theory behind the very sad decline of the cuckoos is actually the decline of large hairy moth caterpillars, such as the tiger moths here. The problem we've got at the moment is so many of our rarer species of butterfly and moth are actually doing extremely poorly at the moment. But the good news is that gardens, good wildlife gardens, can help these rare species move around the countryside in their endless search to find new habitats. We try to accommodate as much wildlife as possible here in this garden, and not just for the adult butterfly or moth stage, but for their crucial caterpillar larval stages as well.
This is a great time of year to be taking seeds for butterfly moth plants. I have here Sweet Rocket, which I think is a wonderful plant. Its night scented flowers are absolutely gorgeous during May particularly. It's very good for nectaring insects and also as a green food for the caterpillars. I'm going to take off a section of these mature seeds and put it into another part of the garden. It's a plant I would not be without. I'm literally just going to push it into the soil, and during the autumn and next spring these seeds will just scatter and germinate, and then I'll have a whole patch of really nice Sweet Rocket plants.
We're particularly fond of the orange-tip butterfly, and they breed quite prolifically in our garden. When the caterpillars are fairly full-grown, I pick a part of the plant they're on, and then they pupate here. Here we are, various pupae, and the orange-tip spends 9 months in the pupal stage. These curiously shaped and rather cryptically coloured pupae. The pupae keep damp and survive, and then the butterflies hatch and set themselves free next spring, where we feel we're actually doing something to help them.
The other things to really grow for butterflies and moths, native grasses, you really can't beat them. They're very good for some of the species to breed in. Just let your grass grow long. And also you can grow flowers amongst the grasses. Marjoram is an excellent plant for butterflies and moths. Buddlejas I've got in my garden are Buddleja davidii Dartmoor. There's Black Knight, which has really deep coloured flowers, and it's got a very upright growth. They're very, very good nectar source. You can smell that in that honey perfume which you get both day and night.
It's incredible how much the wildlife really brings this garden to life, and how much the wildlife relishes the place, and how it gives new experiences to us each day. The garden would be two-dimensional if it was just garden plants. only. And we just love being amongst it.
Do you know, I love that tip about collecting seed by simply cutting the stem and sticking it where you want seeds to grow, so they will fall naturally and grow naturally. It's such a simple idea, but I hadn't thought of that one before. And as for butterflies, here in the jewel garden, when the sun shines at this time of year, there can be just a bustle of butterflies. And it does feel that suddenly the garden belongs to them. Now, coming up, we join Adam at home to see how his new garden is shaping up. But first, we join Carol as she celebrates her plant of the month.
As we pass into September, we mark the beginning of autumn. Leaves start to change their colour. Perennials begin to fade down and mellow. But there's one plant that seizes this opportunity to celebrate September. It is, of course, the sedum. Here at RHS Rosemore, their sedums are at their very peak. They're commonly known as stone crops, and they're found primarily in the northern hemisphere. It gets the name of stone crop because part of the family live on stony ledges and rocky outcrops where they get practically no water at all. But when most of us talk about sedums, these are the plants that we're referring to give big clumps of colour at this time of year. But look a little closer and you'll find that each of these plateaus is composed of lots and lots of tiny starry flowers which open in succession. And the leaves are succulent. They're used as reservoirs because all sedums love dry places, and those leaves enable them to store water even through a drought. Taxonomists have recently changed the name of some members of the family to Hylotelephion, though most of us gardeners still call them sedums. And as far as cultivation goes, no plant could be more straightforward. Just look at this gorgeous clump of Joyce Henderson. She's absolutely beautiful, and you almost feel as though she chose this very spot to grow because it's perfect. For a start, it's in full sun. The soil here is not too rich. They really don't want very, very fertile soil, or they'll behave out of character. Equally, if you plant them in shade, although they'll survive, they'll never be themselves. Sedums are good all-rounders, but they can sometimes have a few problems. When sedums are growing in really rich, fertile soil, perhaps it's been over-manured, they tend to do this. They splay outwards because those stems get taller and taller and weaker, and they can no longer support these great heads of flower. But there's a really easy way to remedy this. About the end of May, at the same time as the Chilli flower show, go out, your sedums will be about here, and take each stem and cut it straight across about 3 or 4 leaf nodes from the centre. You'll be left with a clump of straight stems, and although they look really peculiar at that time, eventually they'll grow up straight and strong, and they'll be able to support these beautiful heads of flowers, because every sedum should have perfect deportment. Sedums are really easy to multiply. You can either do it by division in the spring, just taking up the whole clump and pulling it apart, cutting it into pieces. But there are 2 really simple, easy ways to make many more plants than that. I've taken some detach them from the main stem. I've got some gritty compost and I'm making a little trench with this stick so that they sit nice and firmly and upright in there. These will form new roots which you can't see, but new shoots at the top. And once they've established and the leaf has started to fizzle away, then you can separate them and pot them individually. But it's not just with big leaf sedums that you can do this. Even with these tiny, diminutive little species, you can just detach a little bit and literally rub off these separate leaves. Every one of those is going to make a new plant. Once they've got some grit over the top, they'll take root very easily. Or if you've got something like the Sedum spatulifolium, you can do this also with these big sedums too. Just take stem cuttings, using a sharp knife, just detach it, cut it off, remove any leaves which are lower down on the stem, and then just make a hole, stick them into the compost, so that the rosette is sitting on the surface of the soil. And again, within a matter of weeks, they'll make root and they'll start to grow. As well as those big, bold border beauties, you've got little species like this one. This is Sedum hydrocarnum. It's an Asiatic species. It's also rooted. Little pieces have fallen off, maybe just an odd leaf or two. So this edge is sort of softer and softer and this colony is spreading. As autumn drifts gradually towards winter, some perennials lose their grace. Sometimes it's a good idea to do them a favour and chop them down to the ground. But that's not the case with sedum. Not only are these flower heads beautiful now, but when they turn to seed, they'll retain their grace. Nothing is better than going out on a winter's morning and seeing them covered with frost or snow. Leave them all winter, but then when the new shoots start to emerge in the spring, cut back all the old flowered stems right down to the ground. That way you give those new shoots the opportunity to grow and flourish and repeat this magnificent show next September.
While for us to get the best of our sedums here at Longmeadow, we used to grow them in dual garden. And in that rich soil, they flopped all over the place. And then we moved them to the dry garden, starved them, treated them rough, and they have loved it and been one of the stars of the season ever since. Now that is what I call a bulb. Isn't it magnificent? This is an Amaryllis. It's called Carmen, with beautiful crimson burgundy flowers. They are big, they're blousy, and they're perfect for Christmas. And now is the time to start thinking about Christmas bulbs. I've got Amaryllis here, and I've got some prepared hyacinths that I'm going to plant in a minute. Now with an Amaryllis bulb like that, you do need a pot that is big enough and heavy enough to hold it steady. I've grown Amaryllis before, and you get a stem that is 2-3 foot tall and then a great big trumpets of flower, and the whole thing is rocking and swaying and falling over. So get a decent sized pot. They need quite a free draining compost. Leaf mould, grit and perlite will do the job beautifully. Not too much to start with, because you can see we want the roots down there, and the bulb is going to sit above the soil level. So I'm going to hold it with my hand there, and then work the soil gently around the roots, so I'm not damaging them, and leave some space at the top to water in. So let's plant the other two. Do try and buy the biggest bulbs you possibly can, and then you're more likely to get more than one flower stem. And these need go somewhere warm and bright to grow on. But before I do that, I've got another set of Christmas bulbs which need a completely different kind of treatment. And these are hyacinths. And this is called Delft blue. It's cool, it's the opposite of the Amaryllis, but they have a colour grace, and the fragrance, which is a bit of a Marmite thing, you either love it or you hate it, I have grown to love. So I definitely want hyacinths too at Christmas. The same compost mix, and we will put quite a few in here. It's Christmas time. Let's be extravagant. I like to cover the rest of the bulbs with grit. It ensures drainage around the bulbs. And by the way, you just need to see the noses showing. So these are just showing like that. But the main reason for putting the grit is that when they flower, inevitably hyacinths droop a little bit. And if you water onto the compost, you get the compost splashing up as a kind of mud onto the foliage and even the flowers, whereas the grit stops that happening. And it also looks okay. Now, you can't do this with any old hyacinth bulbs that you buy. You need to buy specially prepared bulbs for flowering early at Christmas. And then, having potted them up like this, they must have a regime that will force them into flower. And that involves putting them somewhere cool and dark. I've got a special cupboard where I always put them. I'll check them every few weeks, maybe water them once or twice between now and December. And then when those shoots are appearing, they'll be pale and looking for light, and just the first signs of a flower bud bring them into the warmth and the brightness, and very quickly they will form flowers, and hopefully I can time it so they're at their best for Christmas. But the Amaryllis want to go somewhere warm. For me, best place is a greenhouse. Well, this is the beginning of our preparations for Christmas. But over the last year or so, we've been paying visits to Adam Frost's garden. And it's high time we went back to see how it's getting on.
It's been a few months since you've had a good look around the garden, and it's been a mixed old summer, actually. Some things have been fantastic, and other things have been a complete disaster, but some of the planting has really kicked on, so it'll be great just to show you around. Roses have done really well. The new ones I've put in have really started to establish themselves. But the ones that I hard pruned and we tied into this rope, creating this sort of great curtain effect. This is the new woodland area. I am absolutely over the moon with it. It was an overgrown mess. Back end was really dark, dingy. The first thing we did was we cleared off a load of old prunus at the back there and let some more light in. And the idea of these paths came. You know, wildlife, when it runs through and makes something curvy and movie, that's what's driven the idea. And I suppose a little tip really is, under every single one of my bark paths is hardcore. So it's a proper compacted surface. And the bark is just a dressing. I think the woodland planting is something that people worry about. They play. In a sense. Do you know, much of this is actually about leaf shape and just making sure there's contrast. So you've got this sort of Dartmoor here. It's got that sort of slightly oaky leaf, but it picks up quite nicely on the geraniums. Great next to the geranium, but just broken with something else. It gives a nice repeated pattern all the way through. I've got a junction point here in the pathways, so I think it would be really nice just to add a carpet of the fern. I really love this little fern. Carmen it's called, a bit of a mouthful. It's got these beautiful sort of really delicate oak-shaped leaves. It's one of these plants that you want, what I call detail plants, you know. They want to be close to pathways, close where you're actually going to see them. Work that in, drop of water afterwards, and it's got the rest of the season. It will get some roots in and really be away next year. Over the last 18 months, the biggest challenge I've faced in this garden is how to link all the different spaces together. In here, I've got these lovely sort of Verbena that sit above me, fantastic dapple shade, but once I cleared the area, it was flat. You know, and needed to reintroduce the height to bring the trees down. And at the back of the garden, I've got this big taxus hedge. I've decided to use the taxus hedge and repeat it through the space. But the shape of the taxus that I'm starting to sort of clip is inspired by the gate, which has got that sort of pointed Gothic feel to it. And in time, they'll really create really strong structure. But I've not just stopped there. I've actually used that shape again somewhere else in the garden. So what I've done at the end of the basis border is used the buxus here, but in the same shape as the taxus. So again, you get that sort of idea linking over. If you remember, this is the west border, full of bindweed, and we're slowly getting on top of it. But beautiful surprises that happen in gardens. This, Verbena bonariensis, just popped out the ground. It's absolutely stacked out with life. I know you're probably looking at this border and thinking, Adam, there's no colour. And you would be right. But on the positive, I really love the way that the colour tones in the leaves have worked and the way that the shapes are working against each other. The Adriatina here, beautiful sort of glauca, but with a deep shade to it. Sits really well with the Baptisia, That then gets picked up again in the colour of the geranium at the front. And now the Calamagrostis is in flower. And there's a lovely sort of purplish tinge that works back with the Adriatina. So the structures here. I think for me it's the veg garden that has worked better than anything else we've done so far, and I'm getting pulled to it every day. I could be away for a few days, come back, the first place I want to come is here. But growing veggies comes with its problems in a sense, and we went to Devon for a week, and I think most of the cabbage whites in the country arrived here while I was away and absolutely ruined the cabbages and the kale. That was the green kale. Strangely enough, the one thing they left alone was a red kale, which was a bit odd. We've had to learn what to do with the glut of courgettes that we've had. I caught the dog in here, nicking strawberries and tomatoes. So we have dealt with everything going. But it's great. It's a place where I can play. I can just experiment, and we're doing loads of that. So there's some things I've done exactly what it says on the pack here, but other things I've had a little bit of an experiment with. So this was one experiment. Yeah, all right, don't laugh. I think they look incredible. These should be halfway up a Japanese mountain in shade with fresh water running over them. It's Wasabi. I saw this on a roof garden in the middle of London above the Strand, and I thought, you know what, if they can do it there, we can do it here. They were tiny little plants when I got them, so I've managed to pot them on twice. And the root system's pushing on. And all we're actually doing is keeping them in the shade, and I keep dunking them in and out of water probably every day, every other day. And wasabi, you just don't eat the root, you can also... You can eat the leaf. And it's sort of, I don't know, it's rocket meets mustard. So the plan is to keep growing them on, get them to a place where I can put them in a big container and enjoy them. And I think that's it, isn't it? If you're growing your own veg at home, why not push it a little bit? Why not experiment? Because I'm going to. And I'm going to keep doing it out there as well.
It's very nice to see Adam's garden again. It's looking fantastic. I love that woodland area. And he's absolutely right. Give it a go. If it works, try something else. And if you like to eat something, then chances are you'll like to grow it too. And I certainly like to eat the whole cucurbit family. And this year I've grown my squashes. And the key thing at this stage of the year is to cut your losses and focus all the attention on ripening the fruit that you've got. So here we have a variety called Mousse de Provence. And I need to leave that on there for about another 3-4 weeks. So the fruit can ripen, the flesh can ripen, and also the skin. A nice hard skin will make it better. So if you've got small fruits like that, that's never going to happen. That's had it. Take it off. That's compost. And also, any leaves that are in any way shielding the sun from the fruit. And with pumpkins and squashes, size isn't everything. It's nice to have some big ones, but something like this, which is Turk's turban, is just a lovely object. So we want to let that ripen. And some of my favourites are the Japanese. This is a Hokkaido. And what these need, more than anything else, is just some blazing sunshine in the day. So nights can be cool, they don't want to be too cold, don't want to be frosty, but good hot sun in the day will ripen them, and you don't have to do anything about it other than just let them take it in. Now the weather is beyond our control. It's actually lovely and sunny now. So let's see what it's going to be like for gardeners this weekend.
Hello. Rather unusually, I think I'm going to be able to comply with Monty's wishes. The weather this weekend, for the most part, will play ball. If you're trying to ripen some squashes and pumpkins, well, they've had a fine crop at Wisley, no great surprise there, but the weather will play ball. A lot of dry weather around on Saturday, a little bit of rain in the west come Sunday, and it will be mild, if not just downright warm, during the course of the weekend. I say mainly dry on Saturday simply because old weather fronts will produce quite a bit of cloud, gradually creeping its way a little bit further north, and that cloud will have enough about it for some for there to be the odd drizzly burst of rain. Not so much, I would have thought, for the northern part of Scotland, 18 degrees here perhaps, but come a little bit further south, right in the heart of that cloud, particularly over the high ground, there could be the odd spot of rain, which may well have been there first up across the southern counties of England and Wales. But I think it'll be an improving picture here, and with the sunshine coming through, there will indeed be some warmth, with the high of around 19, possibly 20. Here we go through Saturday night and on into Sunday. First signs of that rain sweeping its way through Northern Ireland into Western Scotland on what is not going to be a cold night by any means at all. 12 to 14 just about covers it. Some uncertainty about just how far east that rain will come. We think it gets in across a good part of Scotland, but should only really be a bother for the western fringes of both east and southeast. 22 is possible.
One of the effects of the way that climate has changed over the last few years is that one of the standbys of the Jewel Garden, Salvia guaranitica, these lovely blue flowers, has more or less gone. The plants have them, the plants grow perfectly well, but they just don't produce any flowers. And I think that's because we've had these cool, rather damp Julys and August. And that's when they need some heat. Whereas this salvia, this is Salvia Amistad, just flowers and flowers. These lovely rich purple flowers emerging from the dark, almost black sheaths. And it seems to be unaffected by the weather change, actively enjoying it, in fact. And I think as gardeners, it just means that we have to accept these changes are going to happen. We're going to lose old friends, but we'll gain new ones. And we adapt and change our gardens accordingly. And this is happening in every garden across the land, probably every garden across the world. Well, one thing that doesn't change here on Gardener's World are your jobs for the weekend. And here they are. A very simple way of making your lawn look much better next spring is to give it a good old scratch. Use a wire rake and remove as much of the moss and dead grass as you can. It might look a bit scruffy for a week or so, but will soon recover. Now's the time to cut back the old flowering stems of Euphorbia wilfenii and all its hybrids. Now do wear gloves for this job, as the milky sap can be an extreme irritant if you get it on your skin, and especially your eyes. But when done, this will leave your plants looking handsome all winter long. It's time to harvest sweet corn. And the best way to tell whether they are ripe or not is to look at the silks at the end of each cob. If they're brown, there's a good chance that they're ready. To make absolute Be sure, gently open it out, and if the kernels are yellow and the juice inside is milky rather than clear, then it is ready for eating. So take it straight indoors and enjoy it as soon as you possibly can. This implement is called a scratter, and what it's doing is chopping up apples. And these are Windfall's great mixture. Some cookers, some eaters, and reduces them to apple pulp. And this is now ready to go into this juicer. And it will juice much better if it's pulped up than if you do the whole fruit. You don't need to own your own juicer. What a lot of people do, certainly around here, and I guess anywhere where there are orchards, is you can take along your apples, even if it's just one basket of Windfalls, to a community juicing service. So they will pulp them and juice them for you, and then you'll get juice back. Look out for that, because it's a really good way of using up your Windfalls. Or you can hire a machine, like we have with this, to do it on a big scale. So I've loaded this up, put on the presses, and ready to turn and squeeze the juice out of this. There she goes. And I've got it going through some muslin into a bowl, and this is just straining it. And what you have, of course, is a dark brown liquid. It's not just refreshing, it's invigorating. It's a delicious drink. And I think if I were to raise a glass at all today, it has to be to Nelly. Because not only is it the autumn equinox, but it is Nelly's second birthday. So happy birthday, Nelly. And you can see that she is in a state of intense excitement about it. It may be the end of her second year. It's also the end of the programme. But Nigel, Nelly and myself will all be back here at Longmeadow at the same time next week. So until then, bye-bye.